I'm Ed Edelson, working together with Jeff May, our producer this morning. There's a lot going on right now, so keep up with what's happening by visiting our websites, web pages, and Facebook pages frequently. Sign up for weekly email newsletters. Right after this service, there will be coffee hours for each congregation using Zoom. We'll give you the sign-in information at the end of the service.
Hey everybody, it's Reverend Tony. Thanks for letting me take this time away from the congregations for a few weeks this summer and rest and rejuvenate and re-energize myself. I deeply appreciate it. I hope you're able to do a little bit of the same this summer. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Love you, my beloveds.
In sightless night, terrors draw near. Nameless fears of talon and tooth, hopelessness yawns before us, an abyss. Alone and unknown in the gloom, longing for the dawn. O sacred flame, blaze forth, wisdom brought to life. Guide us with the light of hope, the warmth of love, the beacon of purpose and meaning. Because we are all afraid of the dark, let there be light.
Long ago and far away, or yesterday and just around the corner, or maybe somewhere halfway in between, there was a town that sat quiet and content, tucked into the shadow of a mountain. And carved on the side of that mountain, big and tall so no one could miss them, were the words, "The answer is no." No one knew where the words came from or why they were there. They'd just always been there. But oh my goodness, the people who lived in that town, cuddled into that mountain, were glad to have these words there. Because whenever the townspeople had a question, all they had to do was look up at the mountain and read it. The answer was always no. Making decisions was very simple, and life went on smoothly and easily in the town cuddled into that mountain. Until one day, now on that particular day, Ma Custis was about to make dinner for her family. And she just couldn't decide, because sometimes you can't, whether to make stew or steak, pasta or potatoes, dumplings or donuts. So she went out into the yard. "Should I make liver for dinner tonight?" she asked. And she looked up at the mountain. And the mountain said, "The answer is no." "All right, I knew that really. Nobody is crazy about liver. But should I maybe make steak for dinner?" And the mountain said, "The answer is no." "Should I make chicken?" And the mountain said, "The answer is no. Should I make tacos or tofu, baked beans or broccoli, pork chops or popcorn? The mountain said nothing, but the answer is no. Well, Ma Custis asked more questions until the sun disappeared behind the mountain. She kept on asking questions until the sun came up around the other way. And all the mountain ever said was, the answer is no. Because Ma couldn't get an answer that was any kind of answer, really, she and her family went all night and all the next day and all the next night without dinner. Finally, Ma just gave up and made liver anyway, even though the mountain said no. And even though everyone hated liver, because liver was the first thing she'd thought of. But Ma Custis had really had enough. She glared at that mountain and she stamped her foot and shook her fist and said, why is the answer always no? Why can't you just say yes for once? Ma turned around and stomped away to ring the town bell and call a town meeting. Well, that bell rang, the whole town came running. From the oldest man with the longest beard to the youngest kids who still needed caring. No one would miss a town meeting. They all came and they all listened carefully as Ma Custis told her story. Seems to me, she said, that we've got a problem. That mountain just isn't helping us like it should. Seems to me it would be nice if it said yes for a while. The townsfolk knew Ma Custis had a point, but they didn't much like the idea. Changing. Something that had been that way for so long. But after they thought, and then thought some more, they finally nodded solemnly. The mountain would have to be recarved. Mason Sharp, the stone carver, nodded along with the rest of them, and he scratched his nose and adjusted his cap and slowly gazed up the length of the mountain. Then he cleared his throat and said in a gravelly voice, looks to me like I could do the carving if that's all right with all of you. And so it was. Mason spent the next 2 weeks up the side of the mountain, chiseling and chipping and carving away and coming down only when it got too dark to see. And when he was done, the mountain said, the answer is yes. Mason rang the bell to call the town to come together again, and once again they all came running. From the oldest woman with the whitest hair to the youngest kids who still needed caring. They all wanted to see the new sign, and they all wanted to cheer for the stone carver and all his hard work. Ma Custis, who had started all of this, came right up to the front of the crowd. She figured she ought to be the first person to ask the first question of this new and different mountain, since she'd discovered the problem with the old one. She stepped right up to the foot of the mountain, looked way up to the top, and she asked, should I make liver for dinner tonight? And the mountain said, the answer is yes. Well now, Ma Custis almost fell over with surprise. But Pa Custis told me he'd never forgive me if I served liver again, and all my kids threatened to hide in the barn for a week. Should I really serve liver? And the mountain said, the answer is yes. The townspeople began to grumble. They didn't like the sound of this. Ma Custis's family grumbled the loudest. But well, I can't, Ma said. I just can't serve liver again. I promised I wouldn't. Are you telling me I should break my promise? And the mountain said, the answer is yes. Well, the grumbling got louder, and Ma Custis, she glared at the mountain again, and she stamped her foot and shook her fist, and she turned to the townspeople and said, this just isn't right. This just can't be right. What are we going to do? Once again, the townsfolk put on their thinking caps. Everyone thought, Ma Custis, Pa Custis, and all the Custis kids who probably thought the hardest of all because they were really worried about that liver. Finally, the smallest but one of the Custis kids piped up. Why does there have to be just one answer? Can't we have more? They said. The townspeople gasped. No one had ever thought of such a thing before. They mumbled and grumbled and talked among themselves. And finally, they decided that the mountain ought to say, the answer is sometimes yes, and sometimes no, and sometimes wait and see, and sometimes I just don't know. Mason, the stone carver, who had been listening to all of this talk, cleared his throat, scratched his nose, and adjusted his cap and said, I think I can do it. I don't mind, not really, even if I did just finish carving the other new change. But, it's going to take a lot of time, and I can't work on it all day like I did last time. How about if I work on it when I can, and we'll hang us up some kind of sign on the mountain that lets people know that the answer is coming? And so it was. The funny thing was that for a while, Mason worked on the mountain every day. And for a little while, everyone in town waited eagerly to see the new answer. But soon, the stonemason got tired of climbing the mountain every day, and everyone else got tired of waiting, and they all started asking each other questions and helping everyone else find answers that seemed to fit. The townspeople realized that different questions usually had different answers, that sometimes the same question had more than one answer, and that there were many more answers than they had ever imagined. And all of that was fine with them. After a while, they thought that maybe the answer the mountain was giving them right then, just as it was better and more sensible than any other answer it had given. And so they left it as it was. And the mountain said, "The answer is under construction." In the same way that people in the story gathered and worked for change, people are gathering in person and online across the country right now. Most people know a one-size-fits-all answer, like no or yes, won't solve big problems, and that the answers are very much under construction. As Unitarian Universalists, we know we have the ability and are called to come together, work for change, and build a better tomorrow.
Today's reading was written by a very unlikely woke hero in October 1944, after he had spent 10 grueling months as the lead of the U.S. government's Rescue Board, an effort to save Jews from Hitler's final solution. John Pell was a white Protestant man from the Midwest, a straight-shooting Treasury Department federal employee with a Homburg hat, 2 children, and a house in the suburbs. He collected pipes, bowled in a league with the guys from the office, and spent his days manipulating bureaucratic tools. When his efforts came to light in October 1944, John Pell received a letter from his former English professor, Father Francis Riley. The letter caused Pell to reflect on his work at the Rescue Board. Although the priest had written to commend his former student, he lamented that it was all for the purpose of helping, quote, minorities with a persecution complex. Quote, if their skirts were clean, if they set their houses in order and keep with the spirit of the law, their lot would be a lot more to their liking. But you cannot have your cake and eat it. Reformation must come from above and within, wrote Father Riley, thinking that Pell would be a kindred spirit in his thoughts on why the Jews were being treated so harshly. Pell responded to his former professor, "Maybe it is because I am young and optimistic that I find it impossible to be passively fatalistic about the plight of minorities. On the contrary, I am profoundly troubled by the sense of complacency and inevitability that so frequently prevails among my fellow members of the majority when minorities are discussed. And it is shocking to see people persecuted and killed merely because they happen to belong to groups that are powerless to defend themselves. If I have reached any conclusion worthy of generalization on this matter, it is that individuals should be judged as individuals and not as members of groups. Law violators, dirty skirts, cake eaters, and inferiority complexes, to borrow your own expression, exist in all groups in pretty much the same proportions, so far as I can observe. I happen to resent them wherever they exist, but I resent equally the unfair condemnation by the majority of all members of a minority because of the sins of some of its members. And I have literally shuddered at the results of this attitude in Europe, where millions have been slaughtered merely because they happen to share an ancient religion and cultural heritage. I consider myself fortunate to have been asked to serve our government in conducting an emergency program of relief and rescue of the persecuted minorities of Europe. It has been a rewarding experience. It has given me a chance to reduce a shocking injustice, if only by a minute amount. I wish I could do more. Recently, I was asked to do a seminar for members and friends of the Mattituck UU Society and the Meriden UU Church, based on the Southbury story from 1937. Those who attended felt it would be good to share the story at a Sunday service. My wife, Christine, and I first heard the story within months of opening the bed and breakfast in Southbury, known as Cornucopia at Oldfield. The former town clerk of Southbury and its unofficial historian stopped by to tell us the story of how the people of Southbury were confronted in the fall of 1937 with a plan by the German-American Bund, which was a Nazi organization that adhered to the principles of Hitler, to build their largest training camp on land that they had already purchased in Southbury. Immediately, we felt that was a good story, but over time we began to realize it was much more. It was an important story that more people needed to know. That story has been a gift to me, as it has resulted in my meeting so many wonderful people, including all of you today. Part of telling the story was producing a documentary in 2012 to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the events of 1937. Although those of us involved in the project had limited goals, we wanted to make the documentary to capture any oral history that we could, and hopefully create something that could be used in the school system to teach this important story. At the time of the premiere in November of 2012 approached, we realized that the town of Southbury was becoming very excited about the documentary. Festivities for the weekend were being prepared. At that time, our fundraising had exceeded our expectations, so I was able to fund a second documentary about the weekend of the premiere. That is the film I would like to share with you now.
In 1937, the people of Southbury, Connecticut took a stand and turned back an organization which aligned itself with the Nazi movement in Germany. Almost 75 years later, a group of Southbury citizens came together to honor those brave men and women with a celebration in November of 2012. That weekend would include ceremonies and events with some of the people who could still remember when prejudice and evil paid a visit to their small town. As part of those celebrations, it was decided that a film documenting the little-known story should be created. That's me on the camera in one of the press clippings back in September 2012. I'm Scott Sniffen, a filmmaker and Southbury resident. So is that the sermon? Or is that some of that?
That's the excerpt from the sermon.
Yeah. When I received the privilege to create this film, I would have less than 2 months to complete the task. It seemed daunting at the time, but upon reflection, I noticed an ironic parallel to the events of 1937. 2 months was just about the same amount of time the people of Southbury took to complete their historical mission. Now, one has to understand everyone involved in this project thought that when the film would screen in November, we might get maybe 100 to 150 people together at the town hall.
The important thing we all have to do is use our moral convictions to say, you know, I've got to make a stand. In 1937, the people of Southbury made a stand. They were right. I think we should celebrate that.
As the film was nearing completion, I thought it would be a good idea to create a trailer for the film. I uploaded this promo on YouTube, and in our small little town, it went viral. Plans were quickly made to move from the town hall and secure the Heritage Hotel for the screening. As reservations poured in, we realized we needed to again move the venue, this time to the Pomperog High School auditorium, which seats about 1,000 people. So, attendance was growing, and I hadn't even finished the film yet. Needless to say, the pressure was on. But another parallel I realized looking back is that, like the people of Southbury 75 years ago, we too had to move to a larger venue due to the interest of town citizens.
So what kind of, what kind of trim was on it? Or it was white. It was all white?
Earlier that weekend, the Lindsay sisters traveled up from Virginia for the festivities and visited the house they lived in over in South Britain. Escorted by Reverend Wall and some of their family, they toured the home, which brought back quite a few memories. Lois talked about how her dad, Reverend Lindsay, had hid letters supporting his efforts in the attic. She recounted how her father was worried Bund members might try to break in and steal the letters and other material which revealed the true intentions of the Bund.
The attic is where Daddy hid the papers that people had written him, the letters they had written telling about their own experiences with the Nazis in Germany. So Daddy hid them in the rafters, and he showed me where they were.
In fact, at the time of the events, there was a break-in at the home, and Reverend Lindsay's desk was ransacked, but the intruders were never caught. They toured the old town hall where an exhibit recounting the events of 37 was on display. We retraced the steps of the townspeople to the South Britain Congregational Church, where the historical meetings took place.
And so then you guys had to sit down here,
This
right?
is our place, right there, and I sat
All
right
right,
there.
tomorrow you're sitting here. Okay?
It was quite the visit for the sisters to come back all these years later. It was also a chance for their children to see the places their grandfather had made history.
It's been a fantastic journey. We've heard these stories all our lives, and it's very fun to come and see the actual buildings and put the buildings together with the many stories we've heard over our childhood.
It's really great being here and for this big honor for my grandfather. He was a great man, and I'm loving for my aunt and my mother to enjoy this historical time.
I just learned about my grandfather's involvement in the German-American Bund probably about 10 years ago. So once I found out, I started sharing letters with my students I teach in middle school, and it's just been great.
Knowing him as I did, he's very stalwart and very committed man to what he believes in, and I'm very proud of him for what he did. I think he was tremendous bravery there.
Like my mother says, he could stand up for himself, and he knew what was right. He knew the right thing to do. I'm very proud of him.
This is just a beautiful town, and the people here are great, and I appreciate you doing this. Thank you.
So on Sunday, November 18th, the people of Southbury would gather once again. Many who attended were very young at the time, or just recalled their mom and dad talking about when the Nazis came to town. Of course, the Lindsay and Lewis sisters were in attendance, and other people appearing in the film also came, including the then 99-year-old Lillian Hickok Wentworth, who, because of the events in 1937, was inspired to write her master's thesis on the German-American Bund. As a filmmaker, the best part of the process is sharing your film with an audience. That's, of course, if the audience likes your film.
When I first heard about the events in Southbury in the winter of 1937 from one of our town
As our first selectman, Ed Edelson, made his remarks, I thought to myself, I hope they like it.
And then I want to also congratulate my cast, who are all the people who are in it.
I tried my best to tell the story as honestly as I could and capture the spirit and patriotism of those brave souls all those years ago.
99 years young.
One thing for sure I do remember about that moment. On that day, looking out at the audience, I was proud to be a citizen of Southbury. The press the next day was quite impressive. There we were on the front pages of the papers, not unlike the press received by the events back in 1937. There was such an interest in the film that 2 more screenings packed the meeting space at the town hall the following Tuesday. To my relief, the film was well received and soon went on a sort of a road show across the state, screening at the state capitol, schools, and theaters. The Southbury Historical Society Committee and myself received state citations recognizing our efforts on the project. And Home of the Brave was an official selection at the Boston International Film Festival. There I am on the red carpet with my beautiful wife Tracy, who, when I was considering this project, urged me to take on the film. Thanks, honey. The film even made its way via Ed Edelson all the way to Israel, where I am proud to say it is now on permanent archive at the Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum. One notable screening was at the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C., where Senator Chris Murphy introduced the film. It was great to see Lois and Carol Lindsay again and get a chance to meet their proud grandchildren. And it's currently being considered for national educational distribution by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in D.C. And several schools around the country, including Region 15, have screened the film in classrooms.
How do you think the people of Southbury would respond today if a similar organization tried to come here? Maybe we can ask the audience. No.
You know, I think that the response to this story and the response to Scott's amazing film and all of our being here shows that the response of our town would be that we stand very much towards understanding, tolerance, and freedom, and against prejudice and discrimination. That's part of the ethos of this town.
And I have to thank the Southbury Historical Society for letting me tell this little piece of Southbury history. When you think about it, I still find it amazing that 4 years before this country got involved in World War II, the people of Southbury recognized what the German-American Bund represented.
It's almost a biblical story of people standing up against oppression, people standing up against hate, and to see it done in a nonviolent way and be successful is what makes it an important story.
When she was on the screen, I was like, ah, that's my grandma.
My husband's grandfather was part of this movement because he was the Justice of the Peace at the time, and he was instrumental in, with Mr. Core and Mr. Hitchcock to enforce the blue law. And he used to tell us great stories about that. I'm sorry there's nothing written down to prove it, but we know it to be fact. His name was Alric Nelson, so right in the neighborhood of Kettletown, and I still live on Kettletown.
It should be shown to more people. I think it's a good thing for people to see this kind of thing. Bit of history and something we should be proud of, I guess.
Even after it happened, it was still conversation, you know, with people that were here when I was growing up. Because my parents were Stones that lived right on Main Street across from the United Church of Christ.
It was really well balanced, and I've learned things about my father-in-law that I never knew, and I learned especially about his bravery and his willingness to speak up for what is right.
Gave me a lot of information I was not aware of prior to seeing the film. Heard little bits and pieces of it throughout the town, but thought it was very well done, very well executed, and hope it goes national.
I was saying to the daughters of Reverend Lindsay yesterday, how many people after 75 years have something that they did brought up and celebrated by a community? It's just a wonderful remembrance, but also it moves us forward to be more proactive ourselves in combating hate and standing up for what's right.
It's too bad some of the older people couldn't have really lived to see this happen, what they fought for.
He caught everything that's great about this community. Everything, you know, that this community, regardless of when we disagree, we still stand together when the need arises.
Southbury was a relatively poor community in terms of material things, but clearly it was a community that was rich in terms of its spirit and its understanding of what was going on in the world, and weren't confused by things that seemed to confuse people in other parts of the country.
His Jewish name is Benjamin, mine is Yosef. In the Bible, it's Joseph and Benjamin, they were brothers. And it turns out that, if I may say, his father and my grandfather both were from the same town in Poland, and they both survived the Holocaust. So he's a first-generation Holocaust survivor, I'm a second-generation survivor. To see this film is quite moving, to see that in this country there were people who stood up and were really moral and ethical, and no matter race, color, religion, really respected humanity is, I think, certainly as a second-generation Holocaust survivor, it brought me to tears.
I thought it was very emotional and showed that patriotism as we used to know it, I wish it'd come back. I really do. I thought it was very touching.
Yes, Home of the Brave has had quite the run, certainly far beyond my expectations. As I think back on that day in November, when so many gathered to see the film, I was taken by the outpouring of emotion. So many were brought to tears.
That was very interesting to see it. It really, it gave me chills to think how our life could be different.
But I realized these were not tears of sadness, but emotions stirred by the film. It brought me back to the town hall, where the Lindsay family had viewed the exhibit. I could see the pride in their eyes. And like the Lindsays, the audience was somehow touched as well. Maybe a memory of their childhood, pictures of family and friends, old photographs of days gone by. Perhaps in some way, by watching my little film, fond memories of their mom and dad were reawakened. Proud thoughts of a people who took a stand and said no to prejudice and hate, patriots of an era sometimes forgotten. I guess I had touched their hearts. Maybe that's why after Lois Lindsay saw the film for the first time, she handed me a small note. It was a quote by Edmund Burke. It read, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing."
And the people of Southbury did something.
Yes, in 1937, the people of Southbury did something. But why did they and no other town in the United States? I've been haunted by this question. As some of you know, as a result of our telling the story and producing the documentary, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum included the story of Southbury in an exhibit that opened in 2018 called America and the Holocaust. Christine and I met one of the curators, Rebecca Rebelding. Rebecca wrote the history of the rescue board that I mentioned during my reading, and that was the basis of her PhD. As she tells it, it was while preparing the book that was based on her research that she found an exchange of letters between Father Riley and John Pell tucked away in a box in the National Archives. Maybe the answer is expressed in John Pell's letter, that people do recognize hatred and bigotry, and when confronted with an opportunity to stand up to it, some will. Let's hope more do so in the future. We can only hope.
I want to thank you once again for being with us this morning. I want to ask you also to support us financially here at the UU Church in Meriden and the Mattituck UU Society. We continue to bring you these programs to fulfill our mission to provide spiritual growth opportunities and to work for social justice. We also have a lot of our own pastoral care needs. Many of our members are struggling a bit financially, and we're struggling to help them. We are also struggling to help those in our communities with food and other necessities. We're also doing work with the undocumented community in Meriden, trying to make sure they have what they need to survive this time. I know it's tough out there. I want to ask all of you who can give something to please go to our website right now on our homepage, click that donate button and donate via PayPal or to mail us checks. We really need that support. Our members need some financial help, our community needs some financial help, and we need to continue to function and bring you all these pastoral services. Thank you so much for considering to give to our congregations. We are deeply grateful.
Good morning. I'm Pinky Chilemi, a member of the Social Justice Committee at MUUS. And here at MUUS, the first and fourth Sundays of every month are Share the Plate Sundays. Half of the donation will go to the Social Justice Fund. Those donations are used to support many local causes and causes in the larger world which reflect our values and our principles. This month, we recently gave $250 to Moral Monday, Connecticut. That is a statewide coalition that supports freedom and social justice for people of color. Thank you so much for all your past donations and your generosity. Please give as generously as you can. Thank you.
As we listen to the blessing of music, may we know this ending as more than a time of goodbye. May the warmth of this community and the memory of our chalice flame sustain our hearts and encourage our minds as we engage the blessings of life challenges and joys. The service has ended. Your service has begun. Go in peace, go in joy, go in love. Join us after the service for a joint coffee hour in the MUUS Zoom room. The link is in your chat window and on the screen. And if you'd like, there's a short link to make it a little easier to get to. Hope to see you there, everybody. Glad you're with us this week, and thank you for joining us.